Well, that, yeah, yeah, well, yeah. Well, that's. I think it's about time to start. I Okay, good. Yeah, little light says I'm working. So, and my wife has gotten on to me this morning, so I know I've got to be up and there. I'm. Yeah, I see what you did right here. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Oh, good morning. It's good to see everybody this morning. We'll get started in class right here, and I'm gonna, we go along, and of course, being an old teacher, the best thing that you can do, and kids just love you when you do this, and so on. So I want to do this this morning when you give them a pop quiz. So we got a pop quiz this morning. Little question and answer session here, where we'll think about something a little bit and see what you come up with. Yesterday was an eventful day. Uh, Started yesterday morning with Susie McDrummond's funeral, and then you can't hear. Oh, Susie McDrummond's funeral yesterday here. I knew Susie a long time ago. Like I said, I didn't realize. You don't think about things because I always thought she was older. And let me tell you the reason why. Like I said, I was a young punk in college, and she haven't grown out of it either. Uh, and she was a young married lady, and she and her husband attended the church there at in Inola. And I know how my mother appreciated her because she was always doing things, and my mother would, she would help my mom taught class, and if mom needed food for something, different things. Well, she was always there, and then she had children and everything, and I'm still punk in college, and doing all until just a few weeks ago when I was up there visiting with her, and I realized we were talking about things. She's just a few months older than me. And here she was. She had it all together, was very, and I'm out here still trying to, hunt Easter eggs. And so her, and then to come back to Claremore. And of course, then she and Dennis Cummins were married, and all the work that she has done here and over the years, it's truly an amazing thing. And then, of course, we immediately leave because Lindsay Quinn, Marty and Kelly's daughter, was getting married in Fayetteville last night. And so we run to my son's house, and you get to love on your granddaughter a little bit, and then you go to that. So it's kind of the full gamut where you see that baby girl, that baby granddaughter, and then you see that wedding, and then you see the end of life. And it's like full gamut in one day, So yesterday was a full day. We're here this morning to get to worship. And so there's some things that we all want to look at this morning. As I've read through this book of Genesis this time around, has been really interesting to me. There have been several things that have come to my attention, never paid any attention to before. And I have to say that I've never heard anybody speak about these things. And I truly think that it's because we simply just look at, really and truly, if I talk about the first part of Genesis, what do you think about? What God created. Second thing you think about, God made flood, had the flood. Third thing you think about, rainbow, right? That's it. There's the story. And it's like, no, man, that's just not even scratching the surface on what's going on. So it's like there's so much more involved in that. And so this morning, everybody should have your ready to go right here. So a little pop quiz. Define covenant. Define covenant. We use the term a lot sometimes, especially Bible class. Yes. A promise or an agreement, okay? Contract. That's exactly right. So it's a promise of one person a lot of times to fulfill a contract. So when we look at that, and I like to take different things that people say, just like in that regard, because when you get multiple people you get a better definition of that. I hope try to. It is on. Can anybody hear me? Am I on now? Can you hear? Yeah, there is. Yeah. I waved at him a while ago. Oh, I don't think so. All right. So stick that thing on, try it again. Go with it. Okay, so a covenant is an agreement. All right? It's an agreement between two people. And so we're going to look at that word in just a little bit. Here's another question that I have for you. All right? Now, this is where everybody, you can slap me after class. That's all right. But for right now, just think with me for just a moment. When we talked about that the sons of God looked upon the daughters of men, sons of God, or put that phrase in there, where are they on the ark? If those are the sons of God, why weren't they on the ark? Was there a difference and this is one of the things I tried to point out in Genesis chapter 1, when God created male and female at one time, and then over in chapter 2, where he takes a handful of dirt and forms man. Were these sons of God, God created male and female on that day? Were the sons? And then when we looked at this a little bit closer, we found out that Adam and Eve, thank God that she had a son, because why? Apparently the men God formed from the dirt were having female children. So, and so we come here. So it's one of those things. And I think when we get into the study, there's some things there that we show, but at the same time, God's showing us who he is. Now let's think about this for just a moment. Stay with me. I haven't lost my mind. My wife tells me that I have, but I truly did find it once. I don't remember where I put it. Think about the body that Christ had after he was raised from the dead. All right? Think with me for just a moment. Was it in some regards physical? We would say yes, because what did Thomas do? He put his hand into that, and that's another interesting aspect when you really kind of study what crucifixion was and so on, because when they talk about piercing the side and so on, you got to remember guys hanging up above, and what they would do is to take a broad spearhead and shove up under the rib cage toward the heart. And what they would do then is a lot of times they're going to cut the descending aorta right there, which if you weren't dead, you bled out in just a matter of seconds. And then sometimes they would even cut into the chamber, the lower ventricle of the heart. Now then, when Thomas put his hand into that opening, what did he feel? Think about that for just a moment. So this body of Christ, and yet at the same time, This body that Thomas put his hand in, how did Jesus get into the room where his apostles were all put together? He appeared, correct? So in that regard, when we look at these beings and so on, there's some things that we as man don't understand. And I think that this is the reason why sometimes, that because I don't have the answers. I'm not. But I just want us to understand that God uses things. He has a different way of looking at things and so on sometimes. Is it for me to totally understand? No. I don't. Do I have to? No. But what did I see when I saw Jesus is that I've got a chance at a new body, and we're going to talk about those things as well in here in just a moment. So the idea of a covenant, a pact. All right? Let me pull up some scripture here. And let's look in Genesis chapter 6 to start with. Turn to Genesis chapter 6. And we want to look at verses 18 through 20. Okay? Now, this is when God tells Noah in verse 17, if we look at it, behold, I am, even I, am bringing the flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which and there's that interesting phrase again that we saw over in Genesis chapter 2, where he took the man after he formed him, and in which is the breath of life from under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall perish, but I will establish my covenant with you. I think this is the first reference that we have to a covenant. God makes this covenant with Noah, and you shall enter the ark. Okay? Now then, we can take this and bring it all the way to the New Testament. Somebody tell me how.
That's how they phrased the good news of Jesus, wasn't it? A new covenant.
Oh, is that what? Didn't Jesus say that I will bring you a new covenant? Whereas here, with this covenant, now think with me for just a moment. What did God do to Noah and his family? This covenant did what? Protected them. It saved them, correct? In the covenant of Jesus, what does he say? If we are in covenant with him by obeying his commandments, then we are saved. You understand? God's teaching us from the very beginning what he has in mind. Do we really understand all of that? Sometimes no. It's hard to grasp all of that sometimes. So when we look at this, understand that God is teaching us who he is. Then we look, and we've kind of covered this, and I understand this, but just to tie some things together, I want you to look at Genesis chapter 7, verse 16. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, entered as God had commanded him. And the Lord closed it behind him. Now, they're talking about the door of the ark. Now then, let's go back and think of this for just a minute, because sometimes you get questions from individuals, and they'll say, well, I don't want to worship a God that would just kill everything. Who had made everything? Well, God made everything. Had they gone against what he wanted? Yeah. is there punishment for consequences, which we have tried to take out of our society. And there's nothing that could be more wrong, because we will suffer consequences. And if this nation doesn't understand that now, by looking at what we've done to ourselves over the last 50 years, especially 60, because you got to put the 60s in there, then, destruction is all that's left in that regard. So let's look at this. So in the same way today, I think about this, and I've heard about this, and I don't know, the idea of praying people out of purgatory and so on. I look at that and I look at this. When God closed the door of the ark, who else got in it? Had he made the covenant? Yes. Did the people that he made the covenant with, were they in the ark? Did he open the door for anybody else? No. Were they saved? And the people inside the ark? Yes. The people on the outside of the ark? No. Is God's judgment final? Understand that. When we talk about this, is he not giving us an example of when God says this is going to happen? Noah sat there for 100 years working every day, building an ark for 100 years, taking ridicule, questioning. That's only normal. He didn't have to act on that question because he acted on his faith. What was his faith in? His faith was in God. But do you think, Noah was a normal man. You think he didn't question sometimes? How long, Lord? How long? How long do I keep doing this? How long is this going to last, God? I've got all these things that are going on in my life. They're tearing me down. How long, Lord? But the thing that we look at is what? Did Noah quit? No. Noah didn't quit because it is counted to him as righteousness because of the way he walked with God and did what God asked him to do. He didn't change that. So he continued in that regard. So the door was not reopened. So God's judgment is final. We need to understand that as we go through and as we look at Scripture and we read that Scripture. It's not, do you think his neighbors might have come along? Anthony, do you think his neighbors might have come along? Hey, if you do this way or put this in there, that ark could be, you get that. You think he didn't get some suggestions along the way? Oh, I'm sure he did. But what did Noah do? Did it the way God told him to, right? And because he did that then, he and his family were saved. The suggestions from outside, not tolerated. So then in verse 22 of chapter 7, of all that was on the dry land, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life. What happened to them? They died. They perished. Now, I want you to look at something, and I don't know this. This is one of those things that I was told to look at once upon a time, is that you look at whether, in this case, the S in spirit is capital or small, lowercase. And in this case, it's lowercase. In this instance, this is a lowercase. So is this then the Spirit of God? And we would say no, according to what translators did here. And so this spirit of life is what? As we look at this, going back to the idea that God breathed into man, and so God takes away in this regard. All right, then we flip over into chapter 8. And I think this is, to me, this is one of the interesting things that you have to chuckle at just a little bit, okay? But God remembered Noah. Oh, yeah, Noah, the only guy left on earth that was, I mean, think about that. You really think that God had to remember Noah? But then I also flipped that over and thought about something else. Was God still running the rest of the universe? We want to think sometimes then, so you think outside of that, because why? I think I'm the center of the universe. Jerry told me I wasn't when I was in counseling with him. I don't suggest going to counseling. No, I just no. That brother, I love him. I've been around him so long. We are brothers. So, but the idea is that what else is God involved in this regard and so on? But let me ask you this question: is there anybody in here that even entertains the thought that God had forgotten about Noah? Not in any way. Not in any way. I think that, this is man's concept, and probably Noah thought, how long's he been on there? Well, let's see. It rained for 40 days, and they were on there for 150 days with all the water, and then it began to recede, and that was another 150 days. You ever gone through and added all this up? And I know in there that by the time they get on and off and all this kind of stuff, but it's closer to like 380 something days that they were there. And we're going to look at something very interesting that it was like, well, duh, never seen this before in my life. When we look at this aspect in just a little bit, all right? But God remembered Noah. What did he remember about Noah? Oh, he's floating in that boat. Is that what he remembered about Noah? Or did he remember covenant? Is God true to keep his covenant? And the answer is yes. So God remembered Noah because of covenant. I want us to think about this because 101 years of Noah's life, would you consider those as maybe bad times for Noah and his family? I mean, when he says that, when God tells you that he's going to destroy the entire earth, and you're sitting there thinking, and I really can't comprehend that idea. And for the next 100 years, you're working on a project that nobody's ever seen. I'm assuming nobody's ever seen anything like this before, and you're working on your backyard, probably front yard, so you'd have, and you're going through, and then you go through this, the rainfall. We can't even imagine the kind of rainfall. Noah looks out that window up there, and not only would you see people, but all the animals of the earth. I mean, anything that floating in the water. When does God reveal himself? Does God ever leave us, or do we sometimes, after bad things happen, we look back and we find out that the only way I made that is because who? God was with me. Mike Schrader and I were sitting at that wedding last night. We were talking, during the reception part of it and so on. And this is when this thought really hit me, is that we want to say that, God, where are you? A lot of times. But that's the only thing that's sustaining us. And we have to move past that and then look back before we say, I had no answers. I had absolutely no answers to that. How did I make it through that? How? And Carla, who do we realize then brought us through that? God. God is there in the bad times. We don't expect bad times. And yet, did God promise you a life of folly? Because isn't that lifestyle, isn't that the way it's described? Is folly? If it's just joy and laughter and fun and games and never it's referred to as folly. Real life has its struggles. So in verses 2 through 5 then, everything began to descend. Water finally stopped raining. Waters kept flowing from below the surface. And at the end of 150 days, the water decreased. In the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested on a mountain. Water continued to recede. Water decreased steadily until the 10th month. And in the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, tops of the mountains began to appear. Now it says that it rested on Ararat. But is Ararat the tallest mountain in the world today? Because if sometime later, then we begin to see the mountaintops, then you would think that it rested on the highest mountain that was. So there's, interesting. I'm just going off what I read. I'm trying to blot out all the stuff that I've heard over the years and kind of looked at and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. I'm just thinking out loud for just a moment. But, today we look at what? Mount Everest as the highest peak, over 29,000 feet and so on. So just one of those things. And so then we look at in verse 12, 6 through 12. What do you think of in verses 6 through 12? If you read through that, what do you think of? What goes on in these verses 6 through 12 of chapter 8 right there? What's going on right here? Huh? Noah's waiting on God, but what else is going on? Because let's think about it for just a little bit more in this regard. What happens right here? Does Noah open the window? And what does he turn loose? First of all, he turns loose a raven. Raven doesn't return. I think that's a very interesting aspect sometimes. The raven never returns back to the ark. And we know through biblical references and stories about that, how that God used ravens in different categories to bring food and different things. So it's just interesting that bird is. And yet, if we go back and we look at it, is the raven considered as a clean, quote, clean animal? No, they're not considered as a clean animal. But yet God uses the raven right here. Reference? I don't know. Just one of those things that, you kind of put things together. You'd think, well, God would use a clean animal. But no, he uses what he needs. And there was something about that it's like in that regard. Yeah, Jim?
You also had so many pairs of unclean and so many pairs of clean.
Right. Yeah.
You can send out an unclean and still have.
Yeah. Well, we're going to look at something else right here too. That there were several things that reading through this time around, studying it instead of just reading through it, studying it, that popped into my head, and that's one of them. But I also want to go back to what you just mentioned, the fact that where you look in chapter 6, it says that God just brought 2 of every kind. Then in chapter 7, where you have some people who argue, some scholars that will say that those verses were added where it put in clean and unclean, because that's not defined until over in Leviticus chapter 14 right there. So we look at that, but there's something else in that regard that we're going to look at right here. All right. So he turns loose the raven. So the raven doesn't return, but then what does he send out? A dove. He sends out a dove. Dove goes out, puts his arm back out. What? Nothing, right? So what does he do? Waits 7 more days. Then what does he do? Sends the dove out again. This time, dove comes back with olive. Why olive? How long would it take an olive tree to sprout, grow, germinate, come out with leaves and all that kind of stuff? You ever thought about that aspect of this? It's like, wait a minute, there hadn't been that much time for this stuff to start growing back the way that we see growing seasons and so on. So what did God do right here? He recreated the earth. Is that any big job for God? No. He just took his time, did it in 7 days. He could have done it all in one if he wanted to. But he slowed it down for me so I could keep up when I go back through and read the story, you know. There's a recreation going on. All right. Then he waits 7 more days. And then what happens? The third time he sends the dove out. Okay, she does not return. I think it's interesting that he makes reference to that this is a female. Why not just the dove? I mean, oh, really? Okay, mine says, but she did not return. So and in her beak, even in verse 11, the dove came to him toward evening, and behold, in her beak was a freshly picked. So depending on, I've got the New American Standard. What? NIV. Okay, now then, here's something that we're going to look at. What's happening during this period of time? The way we talk to children and so on about Christmas, what do they do before Christmas? Are they anticipating and you just excited? And you're going to tell me that there wasn't excitement inside that ark, Jerry, going on when it was like, hey, I mean, seriously, think about it. Aren't they human? You're going to tell me that after being in the dark? I got another question. We were talking about this last week. How did they get any light in the ark? You ever thought about that? But I got one even better than that. How did you get oxygen into there enough for all those animals to breathe and everything that were down below when all you had open was one little window that you had to keep shut? And keep it watertight. And if it's watertight, it's also airtight. Could have been, but you still got to breathe. And how, I mean, so there's lots of questions. Like say, sometimes because of taught science, I used to think about this stuff. And I got more questions than I got answers, but it's neat stuff. I love it. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, they showed if you've never been there, go. It's up in Kentucky. It's there and go in that thing and don't just walk through. Right? There's so many people just walk through there. It's kind of like going through Yellowstone. Yeah, we went through Yellowstone. It was like, are you kidding me? You didn't stop and look. You didn't schedule your. See, once again, science teacher, knowing how the patterns of animals and so on, schedule your vacation just before the full moon, because if you do that, what are animals? Are more active, you're going to see more stuff. And so, I mean, how many people, anybody ever do that besides me? I'm a weirdo. I got it. But yeah, I'd like to try to plan and do things but they go in there and they had like a system where that you could pull water up But if you pulled water up, it's from mixed with salt and water and everything else that was on the earth. I mean, how could you? So how did you? Well, the only way we can really desalinization is through evaporation. They got an electrolysis process now and they're working on that too. But could have caught rainwater, yeah. And it also shows on there how that they stored jars that, in that regard. And because you're not as active, you're held in there. The humidity was probably pretty high. Maybe you're not going to sweat as much, so you don't. There's all kinds of questions, and it's like, but God had it. Whatever happened in that 100 years in that building of that ark, God took care of everything we can only imagine. We think about these questions, and then we try to put inside that what we think might have, how he might have worked that. But do we know? And the answer is no. But we do know this. Who took care of it? God did. Because why? What's that word? Covenant. That was his promise of that agreement that he made to fulfill his contract to Noah. Now then, I want you to look at something. Okay. Now, it came about in the 601st year, in the first month, on the first day of the month. Anybody ever paid real close attention to that? I had never really thought about it. First month, first day of the month, and when did Christ rise from the dead? First day of the week. So what did God put on the first? Showing his salvation, did he not? Did he save them? Yes. And look what he did. So on the first, the water was dried up from the ark. Then Noah, okay, now we're going to look at something right here. Then Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the surface of the ground was dry. So everybody ran out, right? Right? He opened the door. So everybody left? No. Never really paid any attention to this until I'm studying this. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Then God spoke to Noah, saying, now you can go out of the ark. Are you kidding me? They sat there for 2 months with the door open looking out, and you can't go anywhere. We're here on earth. God's promised us heaven, and we're trying to look, but can you get there yet? Is he teaching us a lesson? Sometimes you have to be patient. Sometimes you have to do things and continue to do things as God sees fit. Had they run out that exact moment and run out there, anybody want to tell me I got a great example. Starting to build a house over here at Cleveland, the guy I'm working for and so on. And this guy's over there and he's trying to get in there where he can do some digging to get the footing and all that kind of stuff. And they brought in 4 and 6 inch rock. And it was like, oh, Bob was saying, you can't put that in there. That's too big for a driveway. One of the guys went over and looked at it and said, it might be if you could find it. But it had sunk in that dirt down there. And he said, we need more of it so that we can get some kind of a base. Can you imagine jumping off the ark when he first popped that door open, what it would have been like right there? But they see through the open door, they see the recreation of what God has done. Is that what Jesus Christ does for us? Gives us a doorway so that we can look beyond this earth and see what he promised. Remember the covenant Jesus made, the new covenant that I give you? No correlation, though, between that Old Testament and New Testament, right? Forget, that's just the old Bible. We don't study that anymore because there's nothing in there, right? Or is it a way of showing us what Jesus Christ is doing for us today? He has opened that doorway so that we can, and think about all the things that he's told us about heaven. No crying, no pain, no suffering, no wanting for things. Don't have to worry about gathering food. Don't have to worry about going to work. Don't have to. Do we see how God is giving us an illustration, an example to use? So for 2 months, they sat there on that ark, waiting, anticipating, looking for that better home in the same way that Jesus taught us to look for a better home. And what saved Noah? Water. Because what died below the water? Sin. Sin died below the water. And in the same way, in Jesus Christ, when we're baptized, we die to sin. So I wanted to tie those two things together. And there's one last thing. I think I've got time to say this before the second bell rings. So look with me in verse 17. Because this is the other one that caught my eye this morning. First of all, I had never realized, no one had ever, maybe I wasn't listening, that the door of the ark was open and they sat there for 2 months looking out the door of the ark before they left the ark. First month, first day, Noah opened the door, but God told them they couldn't come out until the second month, 27th day. Then it says that Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him, every beast, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by there. Now, wait a minute. How did they go on there? By twos. They come off by families. Little interesting aspect there. I'd never really thought about that. But they went on by twos, but when they come off there, they come off by families. Families indicates more than two. Well, no, it says that they went, but they entered in two, male and female. No, it says male and female. Right. But they only took two of every kind. Now, here's my point, Jim. He only took 2 giraffes. But when they came off as a family. They came off as a family, see? So the idea is that God had started this repopulation process while they were still on the ark. Okay? So that's where we're going to shut it off for this week, and we'll kind of take a look and we'll go from there. And the next thing, we'll start in verse 20 of chapter 8 next week. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate you very much.